AOI March lunch meeting and presentation. I am Cindy Gwelly. I'm president of AOI this year, and we welcome all of you, both members and non-members and guests. And it's wonderful to see such a full room. We have a little bit of a meeting to go through and some business to take care of, and then we're going to have our presentation. We have a recap of our February meeting, which was with DC Theater Lab's Deb Gottesman. And thank you all for those of you who participated and were willing to put yourself on the stage and out there. If you haven't seen the video, it is on our YouTube channel. And it was actually a lot of fun, and we learned a lot about a lot of our members that day. So thank you for participating in that. It's both. The recap is in our newsletter, and the video is on both the website and on YouTube. So unless there are any objections, we're going to use that as our official record of the meeting for February. Anybody, is that okay with seeing heads nods? We're going to take that as a yes. A couple of events to make you aware of. I don't think you can ignore the cherry blossoms around town. So the Cherry Blossom Festival has begun for the year. Thanks to Barbara Ehrlich, who has been involved with the Cherry Blossom Festival for many years. You have rat cards on your table that list some of the event. These are the pretty, I had one here, the pretty pink rat cards that list some of them. There are events all over the city. It goes on for a month. And even though the blooms are just at their peak, I don't know, there are a couple more days of their peak before the winds come in and the rains on Friday. So it's a good opportunity to celebrate them and to say goodbye to Stumpy. Because apparently, I don't know if he's going to live at the Arboretum or they're just taking some pieces of him to propagate him at the Arboretum, but that will be the last time we get a chance to see Stumpy. There is a Sewall restoration project that's going to start, I think, at the end of May and go on for 3 years. So I think a lot of us take the cherry blossoms for granted. So if you haven't been down there in a while, it might be a nice opportunity to see them in as full as they are before they're going to have to regrow. Yes? Do we have any engineers in the audience? Anybody who's working on the project knows the project? No, but we'll find out for you, and because it's a good question, and the history of the tidal basin itself is phenomenally interesting. So as we go forward, we'll try to get more information on that, and maybe even have a program about that and what's happening for that. There is an event on March 27th, for those of you who don't want to leave the house. It's a webinar from DC Preservation League. It's about women's suffrage in DC from 1848 to 1973. And that you can sign up for free on the DC Preservation League's website and attend that. It's an afternoon event. We are coming up very, very quickly to the DC History Conference. It's the 50th anniversary this year. It's from April 4th to April 6th. You can go on the DC History Center's website and take a look at the programming that's there and what is scheduled to be there, including on April 5th from 1:15 to 3:15, which is oddly specific. There is a History Network event, which AOI will be attending and have a presence and a table at. So if you are going to the conference, please stop by and say hello and come visit our table. We also are coming up quickly in April at the Collecting DC History event that we've been talking about, that is going to be taking place at the Hyrick House Garden. So it's going to be outdoor. It's rain or shine, so you can come either way. And archivists in the city are pretty sure that you all are sitting on gold in terms of DC history. So the papers, the photos, the programs, the commemorative programs, the letters and the diaries that you might have in your home, and if you're looking to figure for a place that they can live forever and be part of DC history. This is going to be an event that has 13 of the area archivists, people from University Archives, the Rainbow History Project. We're going to have the DC Preservation League. We have a number of archives, including AOI, will be there also helping and helping to sponsor and to represent there. All ways you can think of to collect DC history and figure out where it goes. You can come and talk to people and figure out where your family's memories, your professional memories can all be stored safely and contribute to the history of DC overall. We know how important these individual personal histories are and giving a full picture of what has gone on in the city as a residential city and not just a federal city, and how important that is. Yeah, Lorraine.
So will it include local organizations that have things that they don't know what to do with?
Yes, if you want to come and talk. Now, here's the caveat. Don't bring anything. Do not bring a single piece of paper, a single object, a lamp, a trophy. Do not bring anything. But please bring a photograph of it. Take a picture on your phone, bring it in, and you can show it to somebody. You can talk to them about where this should go and what I can do with it. Anacostia Community Museum, so there will be some museums there as well. So all levels of archives are going to be there. We'll be sending out more information virtually, so you'll be getting emails about this. But the two things to remember, it's April 21st, and it's going to be at the Hyrick House Museum Garden, so you get a chance to go visit that if you haven't been there for a while. And the other thing is, of course, once again, not to bring anything. We don't want it to be damaged, and we don't want it to be lost if it's something that's important to you. So we'll give you some more information about it. But yes, if you're trying to figure out where your organization's archives should go, the DC Archives will also be there represented. So we're going to try to find a place for everybody's kind of collective history and where that might go. Hopefully this is going to be the first event of many of these types of events to figure out how we as AOI and how we as individuals can contribute more to the full story of DC. So that's very exciting. Look in your emails for any more information about that as well. And we'll talk about it next time we're here as well. We had last year Diana Parcell come talk about Eliza Sidmore and the cherry trees and her involvement, the journalist's involvement in getting the cherry trees from Japan to the tidal basin. She is going to be back here at WNDC giving a book talk March 26th, so next Tuesday, from 1 to 2. So if anybody's interested in hearing her, wanted to talk to her again or hear a little bit more about Eliza Sidmore, that's coming up as well. A request for renewal of memberships. If you have not already done so, I'm going to ask Carolyn Michelle, our treasurer, and our membership committee chairperson, to talk a little bit about where we are in terms of membership.
Thank you, Cindy. So 68% of our members have renewed. Okay, is that better? Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? So 68% of our membership have renewed. Thank you to all of you who have renewed, probably everyone here. So I just encourage, for the record, if you haven't, please do. We currently have $6,628 in our checking account, which should get us through the year with our expenses for the newsletter, but there are always unexpected expenses, so we rely on the renewals dues to pay our expenses. So moving on from that, new or visitors, my sisters are here. Cheryl and Clarissa. We always take each other out for our birthdays, and this year I told her, instead of taking me out, can you please come to an AOI luncheon?
Nice.
So they're here. And they're also members, so thank you. And we've got a whole slew of Sewards here. So I don't know if you want to introduce en masse, or Sherri, do you want to introduce your family?
Yes, I'm Sherri Sewall. Hello, Sherri. Good afternoon. I am Sherri Sewall. I'll be presenting today, but I have some family here. Sherri Sewall as well.
Oh.
And then my cousin Sarah. So, thank you.
Do you have any other visitors?
Will my other visitors wave? I won't make you stand. I have coworkers. I have my best friend from middle school. I have a cousin on my mom's side. And I have my friend Juliet.
Oh.
Thank you. Welcome. Any other visitors that aren't Sewards?
Hi, I'm Vera Abbott. I brought my friend. We worked together for many, many years with the D.C. Board of Parole. And this is Barbara Ridley.
Thanks for coming.
Got one more.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Edith Michelle. I'm with the Woodrow Wilson House. A historian of AOI came to visit our new exhibit just the other day, and his name is Terry, and he invited me to the luncheon, and I know he's not here because he said, I can't come today, but I would like you to come to the luncheon, so thank you.
So glad you did.
Thanks for coming.
And please, all the visitors, please consider joining AOI.
Great. One more.
Is today your birthday?
My birthday was March 6th, but I celebrate for the whole month. So.
I'm Teresa Saxton, and Pat Tyson and I are with the Military Road School Preservation Trust, the membership, and we brought a guest who is a Military Road School alumnus, Rose Harper, native Washingtonian. Some of you may know her. She's into golf. But Rose is with us today, and we're pleased to have her.
Get everybody?
Yep.
Oh. I'm getting my steps in today.
Hi, I'm Vicki Crawford. I am a fifth-generation Washingtonian, and I would like to welcome my guests again. I think it's time that they need to become members. Kathy Wiesman, Lana Parvizian, old dear friends, and we live way out in the country in northern Montgomery County. But more than anything, I want to acknowledge the fact that Knight Kiplinger is here today, and it was his father, Austin Kiplinger, who got me into AOI about 20 years ago.
And that's such a wonderful lead-in to us giving a very gentle bit of pressure to Knight to maybe come and talk to us about his family's history. As he said, they have collected so much family history for both your father and your family in general, and some memories. So a little encouragement as you pass through, that he might be able to be welcome back to maybe come talk to us in the fall. So thank you very much for being here. Wonderful. Pressure works. Thank you. That pressure works. I do also want to acknowledge John Lockwood, who is here today, and he is going to be our April speaker. So he's going to be talking to us on April 18th. He wrote a book called The Siege of Washington, and this is going to be detailing the 12 days that Washington was considered under siege after the fall of Fort Sumter. Is that fair to say? All right. Okay, it's a wonderful book. I've used the book in my own classes teaching. So it's a fabulous story, and we don't think of Washington as being in the middle of the tensions and the war and what might or might not have happened to Washington if things had gone a little bit differently. So he's going to be talking to us about that on April 18th. So please come for that. We've got a bit of self-examination that we're going to be doing today, looking at AOI, but I think not only do we look at AOI and our own history, but it sheds a bit of light on DC's cultural, social, and racial history as well. So we are an organization that does reflect its times as to the makeup of the organization and the activities of the organization. I want to give a shout out before I introduce Sherri and Bill to the materials that Sherri brought in the back of the room. So if you haven't had a chance to take a look at them, there's some terrific material that is connected to the stories that you're about to hear. It seems like some of you know Sherri, but I'm going to introduce her anyway. She, for those of you who don't know, Sherri is also a fifth-generation Washingtonian. I love the fact that there are probably people in this room whose families all knew each other generations back and met each other at the grocery store, at some point previously. She did grow up in Southwest D.C., attended D.C. public schools, Woodson Senior High School, for those of you who know, graduated from UDC and also holds a master's from Mercer University. She has worked as an educator, both in the corporate world and also in public schools ever since. She was named one of Georgia's Teachers of the Year for her teaching as well. I don't think we're going to have to ask her who was easier to teach, people in the corporate world or elementary school students. I think we can probably guess who that was. She's currently an English language specialist at Randolph Elementary in Arlington County. And it is her family that we're going to be hearing more about today. Bill Brown virtually needs no introduction, but I'm going to say a few words about him as well. Again, a fifth-generation Washingtonian who attended D.C. public schools, also graduated from American University, worked as a public radio executive at WAMU, and worked in law enforcement for several decades, rising to the rank of Deputy Chief of Police for Fairfax County. And then in, quote, retirement, became a canal bargeman on the C&O Canal. He has served as a trustee for the Historical Society of D.C. and continues to sit on what is now the D.C. History Center's Collections Committee. He was AOI's president for 20 years and continues to be our North Star as past president of AOI. So it is in that capacity as president of AOI that the story today begins. So I will turn it over to Bill.
Well, thank you, Cindy. I knew I was going to say something that was going to be a little unusual being up here as a presenter, as the last time I served in that capacity was almost 20 years ago when I did a program on law enforcement, the history of law enforcement in D.C. So today, I'm putting aside all that stuff, and I'm going to talk to you all and hopefully enlighten you about what really is nearly a 20-year quest for unresolved mystery, which we think has now been resolved, and we're doing this jointly with Sherri Sewall because, as you'll learn towards the end of the first part of this program, it was Sherri that actually brought to light some information that stitched together and helped solve this mystery. My glass won't quite do it. I know I'll forget to do this at the end, or we'll get into questions and answers or something, so I want to have some acknowledgments and thank yous up front rather than at the end. And first, and this isn't in any order of importance or alphabetical, but John Kelly, formerly of the Washington Post and DC's Answer Man, because he helped on numerous occasions to help promote Nelson's and my quest to find out more about the two organizations. We knew about AOI, but we did not know about the Parallel African American Organization. Thank you, JR. And it was a big mystery, and you'll find out how that mystery sort of came to unravel and resolve itself. Sherri, of course, because she's the, she's the person with the big magnifying glass that's shown some light on this and really helped us resolve this. Toni White Richardson from the DC Public Library, who's over here, I want to thank her because a couple of years ago she pointed me in the right direction of some research into the elites of color and some other books written on the cultural disparities in Washington during the early 1900s. And because she pointed me in that direction, it helped me get a firmer grasp on why some of the things happened among and between these two organizations. Terry Waltz, who was mentioned earlier, he's an AOI member. He's not here today. He's off doing something else. But Terry, just within the last couple months, shared some information with me about some of the personalities and all of the oldest inhabitants colored that I've just now worked into the program. So, I mean, this is fresh material. And as Sherri and I said earlier, as we even move forward, we're sure that more things are going to be revealed that'll be even, add more to this story. And of course, Nelson Ryman Snyder. Nelson's not here today. He's AOI's historian. But Nelson and I sort of pursued this quest of why were there these two organizations. The program today is really going to be in three parts. I'm going to do this first part, and then Sherri's going to come up and tell her family story and how that has really cemented the two organizations together. And then I'm going to come back and we'll answer any questions jointly. But then we have something that we want the membership and those here today to approve a ceremonial resolution that the board has passed about the two organizations, AOI and the Association of Oldest Inhabitants, colored of the District of Columbia. So this all started back in about 2005, so we're just shy of 20 years of looking into this. And back in 2005, and a lot of this was set up as a standalone program, so don't read these slides that have text. You don't have to read them. Just listen and wait for the picture to show up. Back in 2005, at a DC history conference, there was a lot of controversy because a lot of the archival institutions in the city were falling into neglect. The Kiplinger Research Library at the Historical Society was threatened because of things beyond its control at the Historical Society. The Sumner School Museum and Archives was having some problems. The Recorder of Deeds, the DC Archives, obviously, in their stables on Naylor Court, and there was like a fifth organization. Washingtoniana Division, which is now the People's Archives at Martin Luther King Library. All five of those archives, or those repositories, were in some way or another threatened back in 2005. So AOI sort of made it their purpose, well, we're going to do whatever we can to call attention to the plight, quote unquote, the plight of the district's historic records. About that same time, I was carrying on taking care of AOI's archives, which is quite extensive, at the Historical Society. Gail Redman had been the archivist at the Historical Society and the Kiplinger Research Library, and she had written an article back in 2001 about AOI's collection in their archives and highlighting it. And in that talk, in that piece, she wrote, in passing, sort of as a afterthought, well, a parallel African American organization, the Oldest Inhabitants Incorporated, was founded in 1912 but is no longer active. Well, that sort of started Nelson and me down the path of, well, wait a minute. If there is a parallel organization, whatever happened to their records, whatever happened to their membership, whatever happened to the organization itself? So this is the article that Gail had originally penned, and here's a bump out that says that Parallel African American Organization. Well, what about this organization? What do we know about it? Well, we knew nothing, except from time to time over the years, Nelson would come across an obituary, such as this one here from September 1945, that talks about Charles W. Gray, 69, Treasury Department, Metropolitan AME Church, and of the Association of Oldest Inhabitants, colored. Okay. Well, we knew back in 1945 that this AOI was not welcoming of African Americans or women or anybody else for that matter. So Nelson started compiling these separately to try to, track maybe somebody, or if somebody was listed as a survivor or as a relative, might have some records from this organization that would help us resolve this. In the meantime, Nelson had come across a souvenir book of the Oldest Inhabitants Association colored in the District of Columbia from 1914. This was a big anniversary program that the parallel organization was having. And it lists as their officers Jerome Johnson, and also in here, number 3 there, you'll see Eugene Brooks, and we'll come back and talk about them in just a second. But that just shows the structure of their organization in 1914. Our AOI was organized and incorporated in 1903, okay? So the Oldest Inhabitants colored came along a few years later. It was kind of in dispute. Was it 1912? Was it 1914? Was it 1916? And we finally got to the bottom of that. So in the foreword of this program that they had, I thought I had a bump out of it. One of the things that I thought was kind of interesting is that the organization sort of extols, I guess that's the word, their readers and all. It was thought that such an association, this is talking about their founding, modeled upon lines similar in the main to those upon which one was formed among white fellow citizens, could do much towards encouraging pride of race as well as of residence among a people whose long years of sad experiences could not of themselves be expected to stimulate the growth of these ennobling statements. Okay, well that's kind of a high level goal to set, but that's what they were trying to promote, and they make the distinction there that it was built on sort of the same premises or ideas of the Oldest Inhabitants that was founded in 1865. So here's an announcement that was in the Washington Bee in 1917 that says there's an inaugural promenade and reception of the Oldest Inhabitants Association, parenthesis colored, of the District of Columbia at Convention Hall, March 6, 1917. And here again you see Eugene Brooks is now president, so he's succeeded Jerome Johnson. Over the years, Nelson and I had heard or come across bits and pieces that at some point, there was a joint meeting of the two organizations. And everyone's like, well, why would they have gotten together, or what were the circumstances and all? Some surmise, well, maybe they got together to welcome back or honor the returning soldiers of World War I. Well, we could never quite find anything to substantiate that. So we sort of, put our research aside. We went to John Kelly, and John Kelly wrote the first of a couple of articles, Help Clear Cobwebs Off History of Black Old Timers Group. And he here writes about Nelson's and my efforts to try to get people to say, oh, well, my great-grandfather, somebody was part of that group, and I've got some papers and stuff. Well, sadly, through no fault of John, because he certainly bent over backwards dedicating an entire column to this, we never heard anything. I mean, despite putting in phone numbers and emails and all, we never heard anything back from anybody offering up any suggestions. So, Nelson and I continued down this path, and then, interestingly, just recently, as I mentioned, Terry Walsh comes across. Terry's been writing a book about Judge Eugene Brooks. Now, this is Eugene Brooks, who was the second president of Oldest Inhabitants Colored. He was called Judge, in quotes, because he had been a Supreme Court messenger and a big proponent of black awareness in Washington, D.C. So Terry has written this extensive article about Eugene Brooks, but in Terry's research, he came across several articles that talk about AOI and AOI Colored getting together. Here's a picture of Jerome Johnson again. So Terry came across this. The Oldest Inhabitants, they left out a T there, were invited to confer with the white inhabitants last Monday evening. My good friend Eugene Brooks went with his committee to the headquarters, that would have been the H Street Firehouse that AOI had at the time, committee to the headquarters, and there had a pleasant exchange of words. There are thousands of citizens in Washington who should join the oldest inhabitants. They left out the T again. Perhaps the bona fide citizens would then learn how to be just towards one another. And this comes back to the whole schism and all within the cultural and societal striations of the African American community back in the early 1900s, as brought out by these books that Tony brought to my attention. So we go through, and like we said before, here's this thing that now Eugene Brooks is the president of Oldest Inhabitants Colored. And there's a nice photograph of him that Terry was able to provide. I don't know if you all can see with the podium here. So now this was an article in the Bee, Public Men and Things by the Sage of the Potomac. We'll find out who the Sage of the Potomac was. He was sort of a John Kelly predecessor, but might have been of a different persuasion. We'll see. It says, the oldest inhabitants were invited to confer with the white inhabitants last Monday. So this is the expanded article that previous excerpt was taken from. They were invited to confer. By the way, the Sage of the Potomac of the Washington Bee was none other than William Calvin Chase, an African-American lawyer and journalist. He played a pivotal role as the editor of the Washington Bee, a Washington, D.C.-based weekly newspaper. So, Terry said, how did you find out who the Sage of the Potomac was? I said, I Googled it. I said, William Calvin. I said, who is the Sage of the Potomac? William Calvin Chase. I said, how did you find that? I said, just Google it. So here's another reference to a guest at patriotic exercises. Eugene Brooks, president of Oldest Inhabitants Association of the District Colored, was the guest yesterday of the organization of that name composed of the oldest white residents of the district at its patriotic exercises held in the Union Firehouse, 19th and 8th Streets Northwest. He was welcomed by Vice President Bryan and made a brief address that was reminiscent of former days in the Capitol. It was the first visit that had been made to the association by the head of the colored organization. So there's another reference to the two groups getting together, although not for the reasons that Nelson and I had been led to believe over welcoming back returning soldiers from World War I. So Nelson and I started and said, okay, now we've got to really sort of figure this out. So we go down to the D.C. archives and pour through the libraries of the Recorder of Deeds, because that's where corporations are registered, and we found both the letters of incorporation of our AOI from 1903 and from AOI, the Certificate of Incorporation, Oldest Inhabitants of the District of Columbia. So this is ours from 1903. When we found the one from 1912, other than the signatories in the document, it was verbatim. It was word for word. And we're like, well, you know, if blacks and whites weren't mixing, and this was before these two groups even met, how is it that this organization would have verbatim or word for word what the organization's been around since 1865? There's another thing we're not aware of. So Nelson and I traipse down to DCRA and sit down with those folks because they had all kinds of misrepresented stuff in their files. We said, look, there were two different organizations. And they said, oh, there were? I said, yes, and here's our evidence of that and everything. So at the time, they actually went out and split out all the files. And here you can see a false start of the original AOI in the spring of 1903, where we wanted to call ourselves the Association of Oldest Inhabitants of the District of Columbia, Literary and Historical Society of the United States of America. And the only thing we can think of is that somebody, Recorder of Deeds or somebody said, no, you can't be something of America. So in November of that year, 1903, they reincorporated October 1903, just as the Association of Oldest Inhabitants of the District of Columbia. Okay? And the AOI colored was, in fact, incorporated in 1916. So it was a number of years after that grand program they had and just prior to the two groups meeting. So we finally got DCRA to straighten out their records. So we're still like floundering, like, oh, where are these two groups? Where are these people? Whatever happened to them? You know, Gail Redmond said, well, I think they went out of business in 1944 or something like that. That's all we had to go on. So in 2011, James Good, who is an AOI member, was writing his upcoming and now last book on architecture in Washington, D.C. And there's a picture of James. He was a longtime AOI member, Smithsonian Associate Curator of the Washington collection of B.F. Sewall, if I recall. So he comes across this house in the Palisades, kind of this Art Deco house. And he's talking to someone and said, that's a very interesting house. He said, you ought to go over and knock on the door, and knocks on the door. He says, I want to write about this house. Well, we just recently moved in here, but you want to contact Dolores Mounsey because her grandfather designed this house. So James goes out, makes arrangements with Dolores to go out and see her grandfather's information about architecture and what it turns out he was an art teacher at, I think it was McKinley, or is it Dunbar? I can't remember. For like 43 years or something, doing elaborate designs for, stage, what would they call them back then? Panoramas or something, for Thanksgiving or Easter events and things like that. Anyhow, so he's out in Dolores' house in Silver Spring, and she pulls out these boxes down in her recreation room below the floodplain, which always worries me. And she's going to say, oh, here's stuff that he did. And James looks down, and here are albums that say, Oldest Inhabitants Incorporated. Wow. And it turns out that her grandfather, William D. Nixon, was the president of the Association of the Oldest Inhabitants Colored, also known as the Oldest Inhabitants Colored, without association there, for 20 years, from 1942 to 1962. So Nelson and I said, oh my gosh, we've got to get out there and see Dolores and everything. So she welcomed us into her home. We're digging through all of her grandfather's scrapbooks and taking pictures of things because, we didn't have a scanner or anything. We wanted to make sure that we had all of this stuff well documented and everything. So, with a little bit of arm twisting and all. And again, another great article by John Kelly, a snapshot of D.C.'s segregated past comes to light in a roundabout way. Well, you can tell just from my few remarks how roundabout this story has been just to get to this point. So here John's got, William Nixon's house, a great portrait of William Nixon, and Dolores down here at the bottom. So we were concerned, okay, well now at least we have 20 years of records of the oldest inhabitants. We don't know anything about prior to 1942 or since 1962, but here's this tranche of good information that, Doris didn't have any kids. Her sister didn't care about this stuff, but people were reluctant to get rid of original, collections that they have. So we put Dolores in touch with Moreland Spingarn Library, who took all of William Nixon's papers, digitized them all, and returned digitized copies to Dolores and her sister and their family, and then they have the original. And this is actually accessioned at Moreland Spingarn under the records of William D. Nixon. Okay, so if it hadn't been for James Good, oh my gosh, what's that? I mean, that stuff might, I'll just say this kind of sadly but passionately, still sitting in Dolores's louvered thing in her recreation room, and she's since passed. So, who would have known what would have ever happened to those records? So AOI and its members celebrated the discovery of all this, and we actually dedicated a program in February 2016 with her and her family, Dolores and her sister and all, and they spoke about William Nixon's accomplishments and everything. And there's Dolores on the right, Nelson, me, and Dolores' sister, Mira, on the left. So that sort of brought the William Nixon story to a close, and we were just so glad that his papers and all had gotten to Moreland Spingarn. So then, like sands through the hourglass and pages from the calendar, we jump ahead a few years, or would it be more like a decade or so, almost a decade. So in October 22, new member Sherri Sewall, who you all met a little bit earlier, shared that she'd come into possession of a family artifact, it's displayed in the back of the room, of a framed resolution from the AOI Colored Incorporated. The resolution honoring AOI Colored's founder and first president, Jerome Johnson, was signed by Sherri's great-grandfather, Dr. George T. Sewall. And there's Sherri with the framed resolution that she brought to share with us on that day. And at this point, okay, we're going to segue out of my program and into Sherri's program, because she's going to do the reveal and show how Sherri, simply coming with that certificate and seeing that her grandfather was a signatory on that program, led us down the path that you're about to learn even more about the two organizations. Are we ready, Sherri? Okay. So, did you want to bring your water up here? Do you need water? I put it up here and then I never took a sip of it. Oh, yeah. Forward and back if you skip something.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Yes. I'm a soft speaker. When I get around microphones, I get softer, so I'm going to try to remember to speak out. I am a teacher. I'm used to talking without a microphone, so this is a little different. It is a pleasure for me to be here this afternoon. I am honored that the AOI board invited me to speak, and I'm pleased to be spending time with you. I am a lover of history. My genealogical journey has been fascinating, and the things that I brought in to show you, I can't wait to share how I got them. So, I want to say I've had a lot of blessings. I've got 2 wonderful sons. I've got family and friends here. But my great aunt Helen blessed me with a treasure trove of family information. Now, my friend Lori and I would walk from Woodson Senior High School down to her house on Nanny Helen Burroughs, maybe once every couple of weeks. And she was so much fun and interesting. And I would ask questions about our family history, and I couldn't get anybody to talk about it. So I wore her down. And one day I went over there, I drove, and I got her. She said, "Go in my garage. There's a brown paper Safeway bag. It has some family stuff in it. If you don't ask me any more questions, you can have it." And I said, "Deal, you got it." And in that bag were the most wonderful things. I couldn't have imagined they'd be sitting in a brown paper bag in a garage. So we're going to look at the decades of connections finding the Sewalls in AOI. So my great-grandfather, George T. Sewall, MD, was one of the gentlemen that got together to start that organization. They wanted to be able to service their community. They wanted to be able to be politically active, and they wanted to help people. So George Sewall and his friends started the AOI Colored. Now that document, I looked at it all my life growing up. It hung in our basement. I never asked my father what it was. I looked at it often. I saw the name Sewall at the bottom, but I never asked, what is that about? My dad was raised by my great-grandfather. So he looked at it all his life, and it got passed down to him, and he passed it to me. And I want to look at the document in parts. Jerome A. Johnson, very well thought of man, high integrity, very active. He was in about 4 or 5 different organizations. I don't know where he found the time. Mr. James Muse, who was the secretary. We see that name often. And there he goes, Mr. Eugene Brooks, president. So at the bottom of the document, we have George W. Stewart, Richard B. Peters, and George T. Sewall, M.D. They are the Committee on Resolutions approved on June 1915. And I wanted to take a look at what did these guys do? I was really interested. So that title, Criticize the School Board, well, as a teacher, that got my attention right away. And It says that in November 1913, a number of colored residents of the district organized an Association of Oldest Inhabitants Colored. They met monthly and have selected April 16th, the anniversary of the Emancipation Act, for formal observances and an annual banquet. They were organized, they were galvanized, and they were really doing things back then. The school system wanted to get rid of single teachers and replace them with married teachers. And I'm like, okay. Their meetings were full of information. They paid tribute to the memory of Benjamin Banneker, and they also looked internationally because they celebrated John Archer. He was the first colored citizen to be voted in the mayor in a borough of Battersea, London, England. So they had a wide purview of what they were paying attention to. And you see the officers, we see Eugene Brooks, Jerome Johnson. These men were really active in the community. Another meeting, again, Benjamin Banneker, they really paid attention to history, and they had a speaker from the Congressional Library who brought attention to the fact that a Negro who'd been a slave in Virginia in 1846 had been made a King's Counsel of the Dominion. So that is quite a journey. So Bill told you about the inaugural promenade and reception. That was our first DC convention hall. And the architecture is stunning. You could go and listen to a 40-piece orchestra for just 75 cents admission. There's a different shot of it. Does anyone know what's on that corner now?
Is that P Street?
No, let me take us right here. That's where it is. That is K and 5th Street Northwest. And it is apartment buildings.
Safeway on the bottom.
Yes, it is. So the city has changed so much. The inhabitants of DC Colored really paid homage to the memory of the people that they lost. This is dated June 1917, and they lost a lot of members between 1917 and 1919. There was a pandemic, the flu, in 1918, so that could be a reason for them losing so many members. They subscribed to purchase war bonds, and $100 back then was about $2,000 now. They have a banquet. They did have a good time. They partied with a purpose, though. The Evening Star had a section called Opportunities, where they listed people who needed help, and you could donate to their cause. So the AOI is listed here. Is that working? Yes. So they donated $8, which is about $124 today. So they gave generously. This is Jeremiah Baltimore, an educator who taught at Armstrong in Washington, D.C. He won worldwide recognition for his genius in metallurgy and engineering. He was invited to join the Royal Society Arts of London. He was a member of AOI. He was also a member of the Masons and the Odd Fellows. His invention was the pyrometer, used in measuring heat expansion, and he made several other discoveries. So now, let's talk about the Sewalls and AOI. As I go through this presentation, I'm going to ask questions about, can you guess where I got that from? And I'm going to ask you all to help me. This is my Aunt Helen, my great aunt. She is the one who gave me the information that I have. So if I say, can you imagine where I got that from? I want you to say, Aunt Helen. So let's practice. Who's? All right, there you go. So Jerome A. Johnson, fascinating man. He was in a lot of organizations. He was found at Howard University's law department in junior class of 1870. And he married my great aunt Glovey. So George Sewall must have thought highly of him to allow him to marry his sister. The oldest inhabitants gave him a gift when they got married. And I've got to read it because they make it sound so wonderful in here. They gave him a gift of rare workmanship in the form of a large mahogany chair, self-adjustable, upholstered, and Turkish tapestry. That's one heck of a gift. And I want to look here. This is where they talk about my great-aunt Glovey, well, great-great-aunt Glovey. Formerly Miss Glovey Sewall, they have Glory. I've seen her name spelled 50 million ways. Of this city is an estimable, I had to go look that one up, an accomplished young lady hailing from one of the best-known and prominent families. I didn't know that. Unfortunately, he died within a year of them getting married. And he had two brothers, Eustace and Dr. Clifton, from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. But he was an impactful man. So now let's get to my great-grandfather. George Sewall, found him at the class of 1877. He participated in the planning for the semi-centennial of Howard University. And there's some names that might be recognizable. Lucy Slough. We know who? Yes. So, very active. And to think that they were sitting there at Rankin Chapel, it just gives me goosebumps. So, Mariah Sewall showed up on the rosters in the census for D.C. in 1820. She brought with her two sons at that time, her two eldest, William and Thomas. Not really been able to track where they ended up. I did figure out what happened with Christopher Columbus Sewall, who was born later. Nicholas, I can't find him in the rosters, nor Zealous Luke. I've never heard that name before or since. Zealous Luke. So, Christopher Sewall, it's actually Christopher Columbus Sewall. Maybe he didn't put that in print all the time. I found him in the Midwest. He is in a book called Peculiar Paradise, and I'll put it on the back table, that talks about the few black residents in Oregon. Evidently, it was a difficult place to live for black people. And he became a teamster. He started off by going down the Oregon Trail. He went to California to do some gold mining and settled in Salem, Oregon. He had two sons. There was a lot of write-up in the paper about his sons. His oldest son, Thomas, was kind of laid back, stayed, but he got put in jail for selling whiskey to a Native American. And they interviewed him about that, and he said, well, it wasn't so bad. They fixed my teeth. So that's called making the best of a bad situation. His younger brother, Joseph, was a fighter, and he was involved in a lot of fights through town. And they have a newspaper accounting of him running through town being chased by a Native American woman with a knife because he said something to her she didn't appreciate. Joseph was killed at the age of 22, and they're not sure exactly how. It was either a fight in an alley or in a Pendleton whorehouse. So, who knew? Caroline Sewall is my great-great-grandmother, and I heard my aunts talk about her often when they didn't think I was listening. As soon as I asked a question, everybody got quiet. Caroline Sewall raised her children in D.C. She worked. She and her mother had certificates of freedom. So this is her mother's certificate of freedom. And it's dated 1829, I believe. I have appointments on my spring break to go to the archives so someone can help me with this. But it says, I certify that the bearer hereof, Mariah Sewall, a black woman, about 29 years old, and I can't make out the rest of it, have produced to me satisfactory evidence of the legality of her title to freedom, pursuant to the act of the Corporation of the City of Washington, entitled An Act Concerning Free Negroes, Mulattoes, and Slaves, passed on the 31st day of May in the year 1827, and is therefore permitted to reside in the said city of Washington, D.C., complying with the provisions contained in the above recited act. So, she was permitted because she could prove that she was free. This is a list of her children to prove that they were free. So we have William Thomas, there's Columbus, Caroline, Nicholas, and Zealous Luke, dated 1831. Do you ever wonder where I might have gotten that from? There we go. This is a travel pass for my great-great-great-grandmother, Mariah. She evidently went to New York and worked in a woman's home, and when she was done, she had to be given a pass so that she could travel back to D.C. safely. She's lived in my family as chambermaid and laundress for 4 months and has given me her full satisfaction. She is strictly honest, sober, and very domestic. Leaves me to return to her family in Washington. Signed, Maria Lefferts, Bedford, Brooklyn, Long Island, September 1833. Here's Christopher, Oregon Trail, Gold Rush, and he fought in the Black Hawk War. That's a picture of him as a young man. And this is a painting that is in the museum in Salem, Oregon. In 2004, I called the florist and asked if there was anybody who could tell me about Christopher Columbus Sewall, because florists know everyone in town. They send all the deliveries out. And the lady pointed me to a woman named Sammy Lawrence who used to curate there. And I got in touch with Sammy, and she told me so much about Columbus. They have a museum that has a room dedicated to the Sewalls. They've got pictures, they've got day-to-day records of their parties, their comings and goings. Evidently, they entertained people, they made ice cream, they had socials, so they were able to get along pretty well. So this is my family tree. And so there's Mariah, Carolyn, her brothers. And this answered a question for me is, why did George T. Sewall join this AOI colored? Well, John Blake, who was a president of AOI for many years, was his father. And although the kids wouldn't talk much about it, they referred to him as Mr. Blake. He sent all of them to school. He evidently took very good care of them. And that's my personal feelings on, why George would join this organization. Well, he couldn't join the one his father was president of. So he got together with other people, and they did the same thing, but they did it for their community. Caroline Sewall, I have her certificate of freedom back there. And in the city directories, they would put your color. And so she's listed as a colored woman. She took in washing, and they gave her home address. There weren't a lot of Sewalls there, but this is 1862. And there's John Blake, who was written in the newspaper to be among the wealthiest widows in Washington, D.C. He was married to a Lavinia Tucker, and she passed away early in their marriage. They had one son, and then I guess he met Caroline, and she had 6 of his children. This is his grave site. He is in Oak Hill Cemetery in Georgetown. And being one of the wealthiest widowers in Washington, D.C., he does not have a headstone. Not at all. I have my personal reasons that I think that might have happened. He was so a part of the D.C. community that when he passed away, they offered to give people who worked in the government time off to go to his funeral. And I was really surprised when he didn't have a headstone, or at least a marker. He had a sister. That's her. Yeah, the monument. Yeah. Now, her name was Glorvina. John named his daughter Glovina. Those names are very similar, and I've never heard of a Glorvina or a Glovina since. So I don't know if that was a jab. I don't know if he just liked the name or if Carolyn picked it out, but I kind of get a feeling that his sister didn't appreciate it. Maybe that's why he didn't get a headstone. They buried him, and it was like they forgot all about him. And this is John Blake with his son, my great-grandfather, George T. Sewall, M.D., and my Aunt Glovey, who was married to Jerome A. Johnson. And there's a little bit of a family resemblance. Last week, I got a DNA hit for John Blake. And I said, wonderful to happen right before I go to speak about him. And so I can't wait to find what that's all about. So this is George Sewall's children. Norma, who was a teacher. Noble, who was in the post office. That is the other Sherri Sewall's grandfather. Irving Sewall, who was a pharmacist. Haiti Sewall. Louise Sewall Cook. She lived on 1011 S Street. And she was married to Dr. Samuel L. Cook, who was a very prominent doctor at Howard University. Then there's Robert Sewall, my grandfather. He married Alice. And there's, who was that? Who gave me that picture? Helen, yes. Yes, she did. This is a listing in the 1900 census of my great-grandfather's family. So those are the names that I already read to you. Robert was the youngest son, and then Carrie was Caroline's daughter. They've listed my great-grandma Beatrice as the head of the family. Well, I did hear she was headstrong, so that might be right. And George was said to be very quiet, very calm, a modest man. And so this is a picture of him with some of his children. So we have Irving, who's there, Noble, Norma, Louise, and Haiti. And then Robert and Helen came after the picture. They missed out. I want you to pay attention to the scroll work on the steps. I visited that house last week.
What's the address of that house?
It's 909 S Street, Northwest. Yes. They lived somewhere else first. This article, Shots Went Wild. Someone was shooting, and the bullets came through my great-grandfather's house, and they actually grazed the heads of the two little boys who were in bed. And although they weren't seriously hurt, they did find the bullet in their bedclothes. They lived at 1132 New Jersey Avenue at this time. What tickles me about this article is, at the end, they said the arrest was the result of a double complaint on the part of Sewall and the colored man. Well, he was colored too. I guess they just didn't know. This is the house, 909 S Street. There's a gentleman who lives on the corner, a wonderful 84-year-old gentleman, and I came out there, and before I just started taking pictures of people's homes, I went over to him. I said, hey, I'm researching my history, and I'm just taking a picture of the house because my great-grandfather used to live here. I'm not casing the joint. I don't want you to be alarmed. So we found out in talking that he knew my great-aunt Lou. She lived 2.5 blocks down. This is a picture of my father in front of the house. Yeah. So as we go down this family tree, my grandfather, Robert Sewall, passed away at the age of 22. My dad was almost 2 years old. So my great-grandfather and mother offered to raise him. My grandmother, Alice, had to go to work, and the best job she could get was in New York City, passing. That's where her mother was. Her mother lived as a white woman all her life. She got better jobs that way. So my dad couldn't pass. So she left him with his grandparents, and she went to New York and stayed there until he was about 12. My dad was a character. He was a whole movement. He was sent to boarding school at some point because my grandmother got tired of going up to Armstrong. They sent him to boarding school, and he was a smart man, inquisitive. He derailed a train. Not intentionally, but he had a spike, a railroad spike. He wanted to see how flat it would get. So he put it on the track, stood back, and it derailed. And they sent him home. So my grandparents, Robert and Alice. And here's my dad. That's him on the steps when he was little, and him on the steps when he was big. I had the most wonderful father. He introduced me to jazz. He took me to see Sarah Vaughan. He just took me to museums. He taught me to appreciate history and culture and my people. And that's him as a young man and my mom. My little mama came out of the mountains of West Virginia. Christiansburg, Virginia. She could cook. Oh, my goodness, she could cook. And I have one of her relatives here. And this is my last slide. And I made this my last slide because as a mother, as a teacher, as a carer for young people, this was in the newspaper, the sale of a young girl. And as I look at all of us sitting here together, enjoying ourselves, we have come so far from that. And I'm grateful for it. But we have to keep pushing forward. We have to make the world better for the people that we're leaving behind. And so this slide tells me there is hope because we're not there anymore. I hope that you've enjoyed my presentation. I have enjoyed giving it to you.
Why don't we just stay up here? 'Cause
Okay.
There might be some questions and all too, so let me see if I can get back on track. So as I said earlier, when I first started designing this portion of the PowerPoint presentation, it was actually for sort of a charrette for the National Museum of African American History and Culture before it got started. It was held at the Carnegie Library. And they asked people to bring artifacts and things. Pat Tyson brought some memorabilia and all to share with the curators and all. And AOI had a laptop computer running with portions of this program because we were still looking for information about the two organizations. So anyhow, so this was really designed, like I said earlier, as a standalone presentation. That's why all this verbiage and all is in there. So we went through, and we're just standalone today. Here's Sherri's picture that, you know, her great aunt provided. So there's old John Bond Blake there with the oldest inhabitants from 1868. And we just sort of clicked through the genealogical chart to show, I didn't see where the pointer was, to show the relationships here and all. Again, as a standalone, there's John, and here's Glavina and Jerome Johnson, and the true connection between the two organizations, you know, at its earliest. Okay. So what we've come down to is after 19 years, AOI has sought to resolve the connection between these two parallel historic organizations, and we're now confident that the connection has been revealed. Thank goodness for Sherri's great aunt keeping all those things.
Who gave it to me?
And the same can be said for Dolores Mounsey in keeping her grandfather's materials too. But we could have another whole program on the importance of not keeping records in the basement or in paper bags in the garage. So, you know, here again, we wanted to thank everybody that participated in the program. And here is the audience participation part. So after all of these years, the AOI board has constructed a ceremonial resolution that they would like everyone's approval of today. This is an original, which we provided the secretary for his signature and the seal. And the resolution reads, you're not going to be able to read it here, so it's like, okay, Bill, when are you going to, because it is long, but it's important because it details the history of all this. Whereas the Association of the Oldest Inhabitants of the District of Columbia was founded on December 7, 1865 by 31 of the city's most prominent men as an organization dedicated to maintain and promote a lively interest in matters of local historic and cultural interest and to keep alive and preserve reminiscences of the past. And whereas the organization's membership, like those who established it, was limited to white men over the age of 60 years, until on or about its centennial in 1965, when it welcomed members of all genders, race, and age. And whereas the organization officially incorporated in 1903 and was recognized by the District of Columbia as an incorporated entity and entered into the libraries of the Recorder of Deeds, and whose records and filings today are accessible in various DC government licensing platforms. And whereas about 1905, a parallel African-American organization was established, which reflected those initial goals of the AOI of DC, but whose founders were prevented from joining the original organization and was itself incorporated in 1916 as the Association of Oldest Inhabitants, Colored Incorporated. And whereas the Association of Oldest Inhabitants, Colored, later simply the Oldest Inhabitants Incorporated, became a more civically and active organization than its original organization, advocating on behalf of the underserved of DC and promoting integration of the public schools, public safety agencies, and government positions, and while the original AOI focused on the more traditional issues of history and preservation. And whereas it was believed that the two organizations may have met, well, we've seen that they did now before this was written, since this was written, for at one time observance that, but no documentation until now, I guess we'll have to rewrite this whereas, located to substantiate that gathering, and whereas while both organizations appear to have flourished through the years, the records of the AOI colored from 1942 to 62 are the only ones ever recovered and are now housed at Howard University's Moreland Spingarn Library through the efforts of the original AOI's members to locate and preserve those records. And whereas it was never understood why the letters of incorporation of the two organizations were, word for word, those of the original organization, until about 1922 it was discovered that the second president of the AOI of DC was an ancestor of one of the founders of the AOI Colored Incorporated, thus establishing the ancestral connection between the two organizations, and that today only the original organization remains alive. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the officers, directors, and membership of the Association of the Oldest Inhabitants of the District of Columbia welcome and embrace all those who, by virtue of their and their ancestors' eligibility in the Association of Oldest Inhabitants Colored Incorporated, are officially now welcomed into the surviving organization, the Association of Oldest Inhabitants of the District of Columbia, and that we are seeking the membership vote for approval of this resolution. So we'd like to ask everybody, just in a simple vote, to say that they approve of the resolution, which will bring officially these two organizations together. So, yes?
Do we have to vote before it's edited, because you said you're going to make some changes?
Do you all trust me just to get rid of that one paragraph? I'll get rid of it. I'll get rid of that because we've now shown that they did meet. And I may change it to say that the record reflected that they did meet on 2 occasions or something like that. But you don't want me coming back here next in April. Thank you. Thank you. So if I could have, actually Cindy should conduct the vote, I guess. Oh, you want me to? You want me to, or you want to do it? So all those in favor of accepting the resolution as amended, or words that would make it more accurate in that one paragraph, all those in favor of approving the resolution, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
And do I hear any opposition? I thought not. None. Thank you all very much. Do we have time for any questions? We got a couple minutes. I don't know if there are any questions that we might answer that might resolve anything, or we'll be around if anybody wants to come up and ask us individually. Mm-hmm.
Neither of you mentioned 1865, and you're both standing in front of that sign.
Yeah.
So, I mean, was it just a gentleman's smoking club?
Yeah, sort of. Yeah. 1865, they came together, these 31 prominent white Washingtonians, several former mayors and all, and they were, and this is another whole program unto itself, but they were concerned at the end of the Civil War of the influx of veterans and people coming into the city. Oh, we were here first, it's going to lose its distinctiveness. And it basically became like an oral history organization. Oh, remember the time that George, flooded the gate, and that kind of thing. And then it sort of, and I don't have anything to substantiate this, I think the Columbia Historical Society grew out of that in 1894 because AOI was so wishy-washy about stuff. They were just hand-me-down stories and everything, and nobody wanted to sit down or, do the research to provide the footnotes, whereas the Historical Society, then the Columbia Historic, was much more scholarly. You'd say, well, where did you find that and everything? So AOI continued on down its path of, and that's why, it really occurred to me that the Oldest Inhabitants Colored was a lot more civically engaged than the white AOI was. I mean, it's like, oh, we like the DC flag, we hate the DC song that was proposed in 1942, we like this, we hate that, but they didn't really do anything to, what were they going to do? They were all white, old white men. They weren't going to champion the integration of the police department or the fire department or the school, or anything else. So they were on their kind of path, while the Oldest Inhabitants Colored really were the activists. And that's even included in William Nixon's papers, I mean, you can see that even in the late 50s and early 60s, they were really speaking out about, some injustice or about, schools or integration around the time of Brown versus the Board of Education. Yes, yes?
I find the Colored Association was a very accomplished and, not elitist, but well-educated group with an affiliation to Howard University. Do you know if that group was a precursor to like the Links or to other organizations?
No, and we don't think so. Tony might be able to share something on that. But it really, and that was one of the things that was so disturbing or concerning, that we just had this snapshot of records from 1942 to 1962, because you miss all of that from 1918 or 19 to 1942, and after 1962, we're not even sure who succeeded William Nixon. And I think just like so many other organizations, it just kind of petered out, which is unfortunate. So, Tony, were you going to?
Yeah, I wanted to hit a couple of points for you very quickly. Bill brought up a document that they were presenting, and if you notice in the document, they noted a specific date of why they were doing what they were doing, April the 16th.
Emancipation Day.
Some people know what that means,
Yeah,
and some people don't.
Yeah.
That was designated as Emancipation Day in the District of Columbia before January, when the emancipation took place for the rest of the country. And then Texas was way behind. That's all we're going to say. But, no. Listen to what I'm saying. D.C. only.
Yeah.
April 16th was D.C. only. And the one that came in January was for the entire country, regardless of where it was. And then, wait a minute. And then you had the Texas. I'm just saying, but then Texas came later because of information. Okay, that's a different than it being the proclamation. Now, let me add this to it. One more thing. She said about the links. The National Association, did anybody see Tempestuous Elements at Arena? Yes. Mm-hmm. If you saw that, there's a scene there with the Colored Women's League, which then became the National Association of the Colored Women's Club. And then when she talked about the links, I wanted to give you an answer. That kind of organization is probably the precursor of all the other female organizations, such as you're talking about, then came into play.
Thank
I'm
you,
going to
Tony.
give up the mic here.
Thank you, Tony.
And we could discuss later, but y'all can go ahead.
One more, and then Cindy. One more, and then Cindy's going to want to evict us and move on.
Yes.
So Earl Williams. Earl.
Yes.
Go ahead with your question.
Just to your point, states in rebellion, which meant West Virginia wasn't involved, Maryland wasn't involved in the Emancipation Proclamation, Delaware was not involved, Kentucky wasn't involved, Missouri wasn't involved, and certain parts of Louisiana, like New Orleans, waived because it was under Union control. So that emancipation just dealt with states in rebellion, or portions of states in rebellion. Now, the other thing I wanted to ask, to make it clear, was the first AOI and the colored AOI, was there a blood relation? It's kind of complicated. That's what I just wanted to get clarity on.
Yes.
It was a blood.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Because John Bond Blake, who was the second president of AOI White, John Bond Blake, who was the second president of AOI, the white AOI, the picture was taken in 1868 of him there with the circle around him. He was Carolyn, right?
Yes, he fathered
He
Carolyn's.
fathered Carolyn's children. Yes.
Yes.
So that, and that's how you got the connection to Jerome Johnson. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. And one more thing. John Bond Blake was appointed as a commissioner, and one of his jobs was when someone wanted to free a slave, he would write out the check. So they would immediately get paid if they granted their slave freedom. And there are records that show him signing off and paying people who were willing. They had to be loyal to the country, loyal to D.C., and they were able to get paid to release their slaves.
Compensation, yes. Thank you, Sherri.
I think you have one more.
Oh, do we have one more? Oh. Yes. Here we go.
1862 was DC's emancipation.
Yeah.
Compensated. Right. Compensated for emancipation, 1862. Because it was based on whose? England. Right. England had compensation, right? The compensation in DC was not unique. It was really based on England's. Because remember, the British just got finished compensating the British owners, what, in 2015? They were still paying them, right, for compensation. So far as the other part of the 13th Amendment, that was only for the states. I'm sorry, and the mic again? Okay. Texas, which was a holiday for the freeing of, I just want, because it upsets me each time I hear about Juneteenth being a freedom for all people of color. No, that was only for Galveston, Texas. A lot of people were still enslaved in Texas. Rarely after Juneteenth. People think that it freed all. No, it did not. It was only for Texas, and it was intentional. Remember, people had to, what? You had agrarian farming. And so as a result of people having to work during that time, they were not emancipated because the telegraph was just less than 50 miles, down from Galveston, where the area where they had the Juneteenth. So it wasn't a communication problem for them sending the horses out there with Sherman in a general order. There was a nearby telegraph, which had already been invented. The 13th Amendment was the final thing that emancipated the other people of color that were still enslaved. Juneteenth, oh dear God, each time I hear it, I get upset. It did not emancipate all people of color. It did not. So, and remember, there were only 11 states that were in rebellion against the United States. Then we had the border states, like Maryland and all, which were not included. So we have to set, we're in a historical society. If we say things, there must be some validity attached to them, okay? So that we have, and remember, other states like New York already had rolling emancipation, 29 or whatever. Other states had already started their emancipation. So we have to understand it was not a blanket order, a check order. It wasn't carte blanche.
Incremental, right.
Right? Okay, just have to correct that because I keep hearing these misstatements. And the thing of, when you mentioned the compensation for the person writing the check, his name was Campbell. He came over from Baltimore, and he had set the price for which slaves would be what? Compensated for here in the District of Columbia. So that was another thing to be considered as well. I could go on and on and on, but just to make certain we quote history, say it with a truth, with validity of the facts. But so far as Juneteenth, in other parts of Texas, people were still enslaved. So Juneteenth, when they, well, thank you for the holiday, President Biden, but they didn't quite get it right in terms of giving the history.
Thank you, Larice. Here you go, Cindy. What are you doing?
Number one, thank you all for a future topic that we will be discussing at AOI, which is going to be emancipation in the District of Columbia. But I do want to just thank you both, and thank you for sharing your story. I want to give you something else to add to your Aunt Helen's bag, which is a commemorative AOI coin. So we want to continue gathering, but thank you for that, to keep the two. And once again, as this story tells you, to please double check those brown bags in the garage, but also to keep that in mind as we're going to be looking at the archives event, the Collecting DC History Day, because that's exactly, these types of stories are exactly what we're hoping to find, to put a lot of these puzzle pieces together that we would not otherwise be able to find. So thank you so much for adding to our own history for that. And we'll see you in April. Thank you. Enjoy the blossoms. Thank you.